Go for it, Aiden. Thank you.
Is it this one?
It is, chapter summary, yep. So we are right here on this packet, in the midst, chapter summary.
Millions of years ago, the two American continents became geologically separated from the eastern hemisphere landmasses where humanity originated. The first people that entered these continents came across a temporary land bridge from Siberia about 35,000 years ago. Spreading across the two continents, they developed a great variety of societies based largely on corn agriculture and hunting. In North America, some ancient Indian peoples like the Pueblos, the Anasazi, and the Mississippian culture developed elaborate settlements. But on the whole, North American Indian societies were less numerous and urbanized than those in Central and South America, though equally diverse in culture and social organization. The impetus, how do I pronounce that?
Impetus, yeah.
Impetus for European exploration came from the desire for new trade routes to the east, the spirit and technological discoveries of the Renaissance, and the power of European national monarchies. The European encounters with Africa and America, beginning with the Portuguese and Spanish explorers, convulsed the entire world. Biological change, disease, population loss, conquest, African slavery, cultural change, and economic expansion were just some of the consequences of the commingling of the Old World and the New World. After they conquered and then intermarried with Indians of the great civilizations of South America and Mexico, the Spanish conquistadors expanded northward into the northern border territories of Florida, New Mexico, and California. There they established small but permanent settlements in competition with the French and English explorers who also were venturing into North America.
Before I go to the board, who does the summary not mention, oddly? Who's not mentioned here? Columbus, or the Columbian Exchange, which I find strange. All right, let's go to the board. Going all the way back to chapter 1, the summer homework. We start before Columbus. First of all, Native American cultures. How did Native American cultures get to the Americas? They crossed the what? Crossed the land bridge. So let's start there with the land bridge, right? So they crossed the land bridge by 17,000 years ago. They're in both North and South America. So they cross from the land bridge. Let's talk a little bit about these Native American cultures. First of all, okay? Anybody remember either the number or the percentage that live north of the Rio Grande River and what becomes the United States and Canada? First of all, was it most of them or very few of them?
Most of them.
Very few. Most live south of there. So let's go there, right? So most will live south of the Rio Grande River. These are Native Americans.
I'm confused.
What is the crop that almost universally they are sold, that basically is, the surplus of this crop is going to drive their whole civilizations? What crop am I thinking of? Corn. Very good. These are corn cultures, right? So you can't tell the story of the Native Americans without telling the story of corn, or we can call this maize, right? Same thing, okay? Michigan's colors are maize and blue. Maize really is corn color. So it's corn color and blue, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about these societies. Okay, they mentioned the Pueblo culture. I mentioned Cahokia a little bit. The biggest thing we've got to remember is, do they have organized civilizations before Columbus gets here? Is that a fact? Okay, absolutely. So they have there's just several different what I will call pockets of organized civilizations, right? And just for the sake of historical evidence, C-I-D-I-L-I-Z-A-T, anybody remember the name of the city that was near what is today St. Louis, that was the largest conglomeration of Native Americans, the largest settlement in what becomes the United States? What am I thinking of, Aiden?
Is it Cahokia?
Cahokia, very good. So for those of you who don't remember, Cahokia is a city of Native Americans. The mound builders was their culture. And I'm putting this down in case they ask you for an example of a civilization or of Native American settlement that was here before Columbus. Near St. Louis, it was a city of about 70,000. You might remember that video I showed you really early on about Cahokia. Did they build teepees in Cahokia? No. The guy shakes that, not teepees, right? They lived in different types of settlements. Okay, so we know that they have a culture. Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492. First of all, Columbus sails he's a Portuguese, or he's an Italian, but he sails for what country? Spain. Spain will fund him. So he's funded by Spain So then we have the arrival of Columbus. Funded by Spain. He's a conquistador. For all conquistadors, what's in it for him?
Money.
Money, fame, fortune. That's step one. So one reason that Columbus comes is so that he can get rich. But it is expected as well, if you're a Spanish conquistador, you have to spread something. What are you going to spread? Christianity, specifically what type of Christianity?
Catholicism.
Catholicism. Spain is very Catholic. You must spread Catholicism. Again, specific historical evidence. Anybody remember one of the things that Columbus will give the Taino people, the Native Americans, when he arrives? That SAQ, he gives them a gift. What does he give them? What am I thinking of here? Rosaries, right? A rosary is a Catholic prayer bead. Okay? So he spreads Catholicism. Okay? Now, we did a lot of work with Columbus, hero or villain, and you can argue both ways, right? Hero because he's courageous, he's sailing the seas, he's an expert navigator at the very least. He has the guts to do this. Villain, he enslaves Native Americans. Regardless, his biggest contribution is the Columbian Exchange. And I guarantee you something on the AP test will be on the Columbian Exchange. On the practice test, the first one, it's the first series of questions. What is the Columbian Exchange? So help me out. If you had to define the Columbian Exchange, what is it? When I say that term, what does that spark to you? What is the go for it, Matthew?
The trading system between America and Europe, so it's like overseas.
Good.
Yeah.
Right? So this opens a door of trade between what I will call the old world, Europe, and the new world, Americas. Okay? Now, for the going from new world Americas to old world Europe, there's two key goods that go from new world Americas to old world Europe. Anybody remember one of the key goods going from new world to old world? Adisa, go for it. Okay, oh yes, raw materials, absolutely, right? And you could say gold really is maybe the number one good, quite frankly. But yeah, raw materials. Specific goods, and that's a better answer than even I was thinking of, to be honest with you. But I'm thinking of one is a crop that you could use, one is a crop that you could eat. Aiden, go ahead.
Oh, is it corn and maize and tobacco?
Tobacco for sure. Corn I would rank third, or corn I would rank third. I'm thinking of even another one. Juliet? The potato. Well done. So let's clean that up a little bit. So going from New World Americas to Old World Europe. So this is from the Americas to Europe. And I like what Adisa said. The most important thing was raw materials so that Europe could get rich. But I, in my head, had specific goods. And well done, we hit all three of them that I was thinking of, actually. And they were, and I'll actually put them in order, potato, right? Tobacco, and corn. Why would I rank the potato first? What does the potato do for some parts of Europe? Go for it, Daniel.
It allows multiple areas of Europe to live off of just potatoes.
Yeah, potatoes become the number one food source for places like Ireland, places like northern Germany, okay? So it's that powerful. Tobacco will save Jamestown because the blend of tobacco that's grown in the New World is simply better, quite frankly, than anywhere else in the world at the time. People like it better. Now, going the other way. What do we think three goods going from Old World Europe to New World Americas? I got one that is a number one ranking because it changes history in the Americas almost right away. What am I thinking of, Aiden?
I was going to say horses, but I feel like it's tobacco.
Well, horses, yes. Tobacco's going the other way. Horses will be one of my
right.
top three, livestock.
Yeah,
What am I thinking of? Think about slavery, okay?
Oh.
In the Caribbean, what good do they grow? What am I thinking of, Casey?
Well, I was thinking of diseases.
That's on my list because, and well played. Let's do the causation there on diseases. What percentage of Native Americans are going to die from disease?
90%.
90%, right? Go for it, Abby.
Sugar cane.
Sugar. Okay? So let's do all three of those. So going the other way, from Europe to the Americas. You've got Sugarcane, I will rank that first because of what that does to slavery, sadly. I will rank diseases second. And you should know 90% of natives die of disease. And then horses or livestock, you can include cattle there. Good. Okay? Last thing from this chapter. Here's a guarantee. Somewhere, whether it be multiple choice, SAQ, topic, DBQ, it won't be DBQ because it's too early, or LEQ topic, okay? I guarantee you there will be compare how the Spanish treated the Native Americans with how the English treated the Native Americans. So let's focus only on the Spanish. What's one thing, any one thing, that is a comparison between, what's one thing that the Spanish do to the Native Americans? Any one thing. Go for it, Adisa. Intermarriage. Anybody remember the name of that culture that's going to be a blending of the Spanish, and what am I thinking of, Maddie? Mestizo. Very good. And I'll get back to where Maddie was. Maddie's voice changed for a minute. So, the Mestizo culture, and then Maddie mentioned something else that we've got to take care of, encomienda. Okay? And I appreciate the hands. Encomienda, well, I'll ask you. The Native Americans, what happened to them in encomienda? They're basically what? Go for it, Daniel.
They were enslaved.
They're enslaved, okay? They are forced to work. Encomienda means to commend in Spanish. And if you came with the conquistador, you were commended or given a tract of land. With that land came all the natives living there. Congratulations, natives. You're now working on plantations, usually sugar or coffee. Were you converted to Christianity as well? Mm-hmm. Were some of the women, and did they end up being wives of the conquistadors? That's how you get mestizo culture, okay? Was this something the Native Americans, now, quite frankly, if you were the Spanish, did you think you were doing the Native Americans a favor with this encomienda system? Yeah. You did. Were you really doing them any kind of a favor? They don't want this at all, right? Now, the English, and I'll write, well, actually, let me write this on the board so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. So how did the Spanish treat the Native Americans? And I like what we did here. First thing we came up with was intermarriage. So the Spanish and the Native American interaction. Encomienda, which was the form of slavery. Convert to Christianity, specifically Catholicism. Intermarriage. The mestizo culture forms. Okay. What about the English? The English are a little simpler in a way, because first of all, will the English intermarry with the Native Americans? Almost never. There are some exceptions, but almost never, right? What do the English do to the Native Americans almost universally when they interact with them? Kick them off their land. Well done. And will this cause wars between the English and the Native Americans? So there's your difference, okay? The Spanish will intermarry with them, they enslave them, force them to work, and they convert them to Christianity. Not that the Spanish treat them well, okay? Many of you back in September said, the Spanish were nicer to the Native Americans. Is that really an argument that you want to make? There's nothing nice about slavery, it was just different, right? The English simply pushed them off their land, causing wars that we will get to. Okay, now, quickly, let's go to the key terms, and honestly, I don't see anything here that we haven't already covered. We even got Christopher, that we need to. Three-sister farming, the main one there is corn, guys, and we actually mentioned every single other term that I have on there, so that's a solid goal. A+ work on chapter 1. Questions there? Only other thing I've said, go ahead, Matthew.
What are the key terms we do need to know for that chapter?
Great question. So here's what's going to come up, okay? Land bridge, Columbian exchange, encomienda. Christopher Columbus and beads, just know that Spanish conquistadors will convert them to Native Americans. Disease, know that 80 to 90% of the natives die of disease. And the difference in the Spanish versus the English treatment of the natives. That will be there for sure. Other things that occasionally come up. the social class of Spanish in the Americas. The highest class were those born in Europe. They were called peninsulares. You don't usually need to know that. Followed by Europeans who were born in the Americas, but they were Spanish. Followed by Mestizo. Followed by Native Americans. I probably should write that on the board. It doesn't come up often, but in case it does, okay, every now and again, especially in a multiple choice, you get the 5. And it broke down like this. Heimler did a video on this, one of the first ones we watched. On the top were the Spanish born in Europe. Right below were the Spanish born in America. Below were the Mestizo. Below them were the Native Americans. Later, below them will be African slaves. That comes later. Speaking of which, and again, I'll give you a break after chapter 5 and you can go and take pictures of all that. I just leave it up there, so if you didn't get that. Every now and again that comes up. By the way, why did the Spanish have to turn to African slavery? What happens to the Native Americans?
Die.
They die of disease, right? Okay, good. Chapter 1 is chapter done. When you're ready, flip, if you would, to chapter 2. And we're right on schedule. It took me about 12 minutes to go through that. That's solid. We enter the British into the game of colonization in chapter 2. Any volunteer to read the summary? Any volunteer for the good of the group to read the summary? Thank you, Daniel. Chapter summary in the middle. 4 short paragraphs, please.
The defeat of the Spanish Armada and the exuberant spirit of Elizabethan nationalism finally drew England into the colonial race. After some early failures, the first permanent English colony was established at Jamestown, Virginia. Initially, it faced harsh conditions and Indian hostility, but tobacco cultivation finally brought prosperity and population growth. Its charter also guaranteed the colonists the same right as Englishmen and developed an early form of representative self-government. The early encounters of English settlers with the Powhatans in Virginia established many of the patterns that characterized later Indian white relations in North America. Indian societies underwent their own substantial changes as a result of warfare, disease, trade, and the mingling and migration of Indians from the Atlantic coast to inland areas. Other colonies were established in Maryland and the Carolinas. South Carolina flourished by establishing close ties with the British sugar colonies in the West Indies. It also borrowed the West Indian pattern of harsh slave codes and large plantation agriculture. North Carolina developed somewhat differently, with fewer slaves and more like colonists who owned small farms. Latecomer Georgia served initially as a buffer against the Spanish and a haven for debtors. Despite some differences, all the southern colonies depended on staple plantation agriculture for their survival and on the institutions of indentured servitude and enslaved Africans for their labor. With widely scattered rural settlements, they had relatively weak religious and social institutions and tended to develop hierarchical economic and social orders.
Early southern colonies, but first let's set them up. What battle is going to lead to the decline of Spain as the most powerful country in the world and the rise of England?
Spanish Armada.
Spanish Armada. So this chapter really starts with the Spanish Armada. If you don't remember the Spanish Armada, the Armada means navy. Spanish had the largest and most powerful navy in the world. And in 1588, mainly due to a storm, England will upset them. Once that happens, England says, we want to play the colony game as well. And they will establish Jamestown. So we'll start with the Spanish Armada. Some students get confused. The Spanish Armada was an English victory. It's simply named after the Spanish Navy. And this will lead to the decline of Spain as the #1 power in the world and the rise of England as the #1 power in the world. Okay? Spain was the #1 power from 1492, Columbus, until about 1650. 1588 was the Spanish Armada. England, 1650, until about 1900. Okay? All right. What's the name of the first colony that's going to be settled by the English? Where are we going?
Jamestown.
Okay. Jamestown. Jamestown is settled for one reason and one reason only. Every person who goes to Jamestown and those who invested in it want one thing. What's the one thing that they want?
Gold.
Gold. What's the first thing those men do when they get off the ship at Jamestown? Is that are they gonna find any gold there?
No.
It's a swamp. By the way, the very first ship that arrives at Jamestown in 1607, how many women are even on that ship?
0.
None. This wasn't even designed to be all that permanent at first. This was going to be get some gold and go home and get out. Okay? So this is a for-profit colony. Yes, they would establish a church. Yes, it would be Church of England. But the real reason is for profit. Okay? Reason number one is we're going to make money. And a reminder, first thing they do is dig for gold. There's no gold there. Uh-oh. First 5 years then, what is the number one export out of Jamestown before tobacco? Death. Okay? Death. 40 to 50% of the people at Jamestown will die because of disease or malnourishment. You can't really grow anything in the swamp. Enter the Powhatan tribe. 1609. Chief Powhatan offers, we will show you our land as long as you put what away? Their guns. Right? Put your weapons away, and we will show you our land. And this works for a short time. But in 1612, a blend of tobacco is cultivated by John Rolfe, and that blend is pleasing to Europe and the rest of the world. Tobacco is Jamestown's green gold. It allows Jamestown to profit. But tobacco needs land. Where are the settlers of Jamestown going to get this land from? Move west, and whose land would they be taking away? The Native Americans. Let's be specific. What was the name of the tribe at this time?
Powhatan.
Good. So Jamestown, again, great causation there, group, so well done. So in Jamestown, let's be very clear. To start off with, it's settled in 1607. And from 1607 until 1612, the number one export is death. Okay? 1609, Chief Powhatan offers peace. And that's a nice thought for a short time until 1612. A blend of tobacco will save Jamestown. Green gold. Awesome. But tobacco needs land. And that land is going to be ripped away from the Powhatan tribe, which will lead directly to the Anglo-Powhatan Wars. There are two. The first one ends with a marriage, a rare marriage between the English and the Native Americans. Who's the wife in this marriage? Who's the bride? Pocahontas. Very good. It's John Rolfe, tobacco man, married to Pocahontas. This lasts for a short time. Unfortunately, tobacco needs land. The Jamestown settlers, the English, keep moving west. Second Anglo-Powhatan War lasts 20 years. At the end of this, most importantly, what happens to the Powhatan tribe after that 20 years? They're eliminated off their lands. Why? Because the English have superior what? Weaponry, technology. The English have superior guns, right? Meanwhile, tobacco will become the crop of the Chesapeake. Okay? Be careful with that term. So ultimately, there's two Anglo-Powhatan Wars, conveniently named, the first and the second. The first will end with the marriage of Pocahontas to John Rolfe. The second will last 20 years, and the Powhatan tribe are eliminated. This sets the precedent, isolating and shunning the natives. Meanwhile, the Chesapeake, spelling Tim, S-A-T-E-A-K-E, which is Maryland and Virginia, will survive off tobacco. But there are other colonies in the South as well. North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Out of all the Southern colonies in the early colonial time, which one is the most wealthy?
South Carolina.
South Carolina. Why? They're so close to what?
Sugar Islands.
The Sugar Islands. They trade with the West Indies. So, South Carolina is far and away the wealthiest. Because they trade with the West Indies. That says Chesapeake.
What's that word under John Ralph?
Oh, 20 years.
Oh, okay.
Second 20 years. Can't believe you can't read my writing. First time ever. North Carolina, meanwhile, is also tobacco, and it's settlers from Virginia coming down there. Georgia is the last colony to be established. Why? Why is Georgia established? Anybody remember? Go for it, Aiden.
Oh, it's like a safe haven for debtors.
It's a safe haven for debtors, and it is a what?
Buffer from the Spanish in Florida.
Well done. Georgia is a buffer. It says wealthiest.
Oh, wealthy.
Yeah, that says wealthiest. Georgia is a buffer colony. What does that mean? Is protecting South Carolina, because that's rich, from Spanish Florida. I hear all your whispers. I'll go over this in a minute. So, let's start again. Battle of the Spanish Armada. Is that an English victory or a Spanish victory?
English victory.
So, starts Spain's decline, sparks English's rise. The first colony of the English is Jamestown, and it's for profit. First 5 years, the number one export is death. 1609, Chief Powhatan says, let us show you your land if you put your guns away. Right? This works for a short time, but tobacco, which saves Jamestown, needs land, so the natives get pushed west. 2 series of Anglo-Powhatan wars. The first will end with the marriage between Pocahontas. This says Pocahontas. Can't believe you can't read that. Oh well. That says John Roll. The second will last 20 years, and the Powhatan tribe will be eliminated after 10,000 years on the lands of Virginia. The sections of the early Southern colonies, the Chesapeake, this word simply means Maryland and Virginia. North Carolina, which will also be a tobacco colony. South Carolina, the wealthiest of all of them, due to their trade. By the way, we should be specific. They don't grow tobacco or sugar in South Carolina. What do they grow there? No, too early. Too early. Good guess, but too early.
Rice.
Rice. Rice. And then a little bit of indigo, which is a dye. Okay? Not cotton yet. Nothing cotton until Unit 4. Okay? Nothing cotton until the Market Revolution, basically. We've got to move west. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi are going to be your cotton states, keyword states by then. Okay? That says Georgia protecting South Carolina. Okay. I'll go to the key terms, see if we're missing anything. Jamestown. Oh, big miss. Barbados slave codes. Why do we care?
Because they were taken back to the U.S.
Good. South Carolina will copy these. They will then be copied throughout all of the slave colonies. What kind of slavery is Barbados slave codes ensuring? Chattel slavery. Slaves are property, and you probably will see chattel slavery as a vocab term. Slaves are property, and if a slave is born to a mother who's a slave, that person is a slave as well. John Smith, first organizer of Jamestown, that's not a big deal. Pocahontas, we talked about, Spanish Armada. Church of England is the religion of Jamestown, but it's a for-profit colony. Poor man's crop versus rich man's crop, pretty obvious. You don't need much to grow tobacco. Rich man's crop, sugar, you need to build a mill. You need about 50 slaves. Maryland Act of Toleration, don't worry about. House of Burgesses is a biggie. I would highlight that one. House of Burgesses was the governing body of what colony?
Virginia.
Virginia. It establishes the legislative tradition. It establishes colonial legislatures, and it establishes salutary neglect. The House of Burgesses sets up the tradition that the colonies can govern themselves, all the way back to early Virginia. Which means when this gets violated, are the colonists going to be confused by that happening? So let me say that again. The House of Burgesses, if you see that term, is the official name for the legislature in colonial Virginia. It is established at Jamestown. So going all the way back to Jamestown, there is a tradition in the colonies of self-government. When we get to chapter 7, when England starts to take this away, the colonists don't understand. They're confused. We've had this all the way back since Jamestown. Why now? Okay? Questions on chapter 2? Again, I'm watching my time. That was about 12 minutes, so I'm a little over about 5 minutes, but not too bad. Yes, sir, Matthew.
Can you just go over the required terms?
Yeah, required terms. Jamestown, obvious. Joint stock company. Tobacco, associate that with the Chesapeake. That means Maryland and Virginia. North Carolina too, but you don't normally see that. Rice and indigo, associate that with South Carolina. West Indies, another name for the Caribbean, the Sugar Islands. They do not grow sugar in colonial America. Why don't they grow sugar in colonial America? It doesn't have the what for it?
Climate.
Climate, very good. Okay. Barbados slave codes. They get copied. It's nice if you know First and South Carolina, but they get copied throughout all the slave colonies, and it establishes chattel slavery, which is that next term. John Rolfe, tobacco man. John Smith, not so much. Spanish Armada, yeah. Pocahontas, doubtful. Spanish Armada for sure. And then House of Burgesses, no question. Okay? Okay, good work. Flip the page, chapter 3. Anybody willing to tackle the summary on chapter 3? Oh, Juliet, you had a question? Yeah. So, before we move on, group, I had a question about the joint stock company. Those are investors. In the joint stock company, they invested in what?
Colony.
Jamestown. Okay? They fund Jamestown. It would be like all of us, 40 strong, saying, you know what? We're going to fund an expedition. But what did every investor want who invested in Jamestown? What did they want? Money back as quickly as possible. Gold back. So it's an investment. That's how Jamestown was funded. Jamestown was funded by a joint stock company. Okay? Yes, sir, Chase.
Did they think that it would be like super quick turnaround while so many people funded it?
1,000%. That's why, and well played, group. We're good historians. I like where we're. It's early on. This is what we're doing, right? This is why, because the investors thought it would be a quick turnaround. The minute these men get off the ship, what's the first thing they do in Jamestown? Dig for gold. Do they think they're going to find gold?
Yes.
Are they a little surprised when they don't?
Yes.
A little bit. Okay, good. Chapter 3. Any volunteers for the summary? Any volunteers for the summary? Go ahead, Maddie. Thank you.
The New England colonies were founded by English Puritans. While most Puritans sought to purify the Church of England from within and not to break away from it, a small group of separatists, the Pilgrims, founded the first small, pious Plymouth colony in New England. More important was the larger group of non-separating Puritans, led by John Winthrop, who founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony as part of the Great Migration of the Puritans fleeing persecution in England in the 1630s. A strong sense of common purpose among the first settlers shaped the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Because of the close alignment of religion and politics in the colony, those who challenged religious orthodoxy among them, Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams, were considered guilty of sedition and driven out of Massachusetts. The banished Williams founded Rhode Island, by far the most religiously and politically tolerant of the colonies. Other New England settlements, all originating in Massachusetts Bay, were established in Connecticut, Maine, and New Hampshire. Although they shared a common way of life, the New England colonies developed with a substantial degree of independence. The Middle colonies took shape quite differently. New York, founded as New Netherland by the Dutch and later conquered by England, was economically and ethically diverse, socially hierarchical, and politically quarrelsome. Pennsylvania, founded as a Quaker haven by William Penn, also attracted an economically ambitious, and politically troublesome population of diverse ethnic groups. With their economic variety, ethnic diversity, and political factionalism, the Middle Colonies were the most typically American of England's 13 Atlantic seaboard colonies.
Okay. So, Southern Colonies, New England Colonies, Middle Colonies. Let's get rid of the elephant in the room. Early on, in colonial America, out of the 13 colonies, how many of them had slavery?
All of them.
All of them. So let's get that done first of all right now. Okay, 13 out of 13. Slavery won't work in New England ultimately because of the climate. Now, if Jamestown was settled for profit, let's start with the New England colonies. It starts with Massachusetts. Massachusetts was settled why? Not for profit, but for why? Religion. Okay? Originally, it starts with the Pilgrims. That's a nickname. They were called the Separatists officially. And they were called the Separatists because they wanted to separate from the Church of England. We know them as the Pilgrims. So what's important about the Pilgrims? Really three things. One, they were second. Their settlement is at Plymouth. More importantly, what's the name of their ship that they come over on?
Mayflower.
Mayflower. And here's why we care, right? It's not for the ship, but on the ship, they will sign the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact meant majority rules. Now that was a majority of men who were visible saints who were church members. But majority rules all the same. The Mayflower Compact, majority rules, and I did right on the board, and the House of Burgesses is going to establish governmental tradition in colonial America. Very simple document. On the ship, the Pilgrims say majority rules. Now, first winter in Plymouth is very tough. The second harvest season, they are greeted by the Wampanoag tribe. I don't care if you remember them, but they is mentioned in Charlie Brown. Okay? Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving. Squanto and Massasoit. Massasoit is much more important because of his son, Metacom, are at the first Thanksgiving. Why do we care? Does the first Thanksgiving prove peaceful relations were at least attempted between the Native Americans and the Pilgrims?
Yeah.
Yes, but you know the story now. Okay, it takes one generation, but what will the people of Massachusetts continue to take away from the Native Americans who were there?
Land.
Their land. Ultimately, then, Massasoit's son, Metacom, will see the writing on the wall and say, we have to fight these English because they're going to keep taking our land. Was he technically right about that?
Yeah.
He was. Metacom's war. And you know what happens in Metacom's war as well. Second verse, same as the first. Due to superior weaponry, who wins? The Native Americans or the English?
English.
The English pushing the Wampanoag off their land, pushing all Native Americans out of New England. Okay, that's how radical it was. And maybe more importantly, well, at least for figuratively speaking, what do they do with Metacom's head and put it in Plymouth Colony? It's on a pike to prove that we are dominant, right? So, the Pilgrims, they are the first Thanksgiving. And then one generation later, you get Metacom's war. And the same thing happens, where the natives are removed from the land. Now, let's talk about the Puritans. They settle Boston, but they don't call it that. What do they call Boston, even though that's the name of the city? The city upon a hill. They are building a perfect society. This is the city upon a hill for all the world to see. Because of this, I wrote a term up here that you see sometimes, most homogeneous. Why? Does John Winthrop want every single person to come to his city upon a hill?
No.
He wants Puritan Englishmen who are good church members. And that's it. Okay? He's not interested in anyone else coming. So this is because 3 out of the 4 of these are settled for religious reasons. These are religious havens. Pilgrim or Puritan is hard. And they're not interested in other cultures, other values. They want their people only. Okay? All right. Now, let's briefly talk about Rhode Island. Who was welcomed in Rhode Island?
Everybody.
Everybody. It's the exception. Why? Because the founder of Rhode Island gets kicked out of Massachusetts Bay. John Winthrop kicks him out because he says, gasp, there should be a separation of church and state. Anybody remember the name of the founder of Rhode Island?
Williams.
Well done, Dr. Williams. So Rhode Island welcomes everyone. 2 exclamation points and a smiley face. This is the legacy of Roger Williams. And what does John Winthrop call Rhode Island? He calls it the what? The sewer. That your trash goes there. So, you're going to get a question that's going to ask you to compare the Chesapeake and New England. Chesapeake, Maryland and Virginia. New England, okay? The northern regions. So let's talk a little bit about what we do with that question. First of all, which one had a longer life expectancy, New England or the Chesapeake? New England. Wasn't even close. Why? Because of winter. The water was cleaner. Okay? Right? They're not living in a swamp. Which one had more women, New England or the Chesapeake?
Chesapeake.
New England. Okay? And here's why. New England is settled by families. Okay? The Chesapeake is settled by people trying to get rich. You might remember, if a woman showed up in Jamestown on the boat, did she have a husband by the time she got off the boat? 5 of them if she wanted to. Okay? So, honestly, one of the credentials became, did you have all your teeth? And if you did, then you were chosen by the woman to be the husband. Okay? And you had kids quickly, not to be gross or anything, because you only lived about 39 years old. Okay? So, which neither were very heterogeneous. We'll save that for the middle colonies. Okay? Speaking of the middle colonies, the book says they're most American. Why? Well, one is diversity. New York is a town of commerce from the very beginning. Pennsylvania is settled by William Penn, L-V-A-N-I-A. And what religion was William Penn? He's this religion of peace.
Quaker.
He's a Quaker. Because he's a Quaker, he will advertise his colony throughout Europe. And who is welcomed in Pennsylvania? He wants it to be everybody. Unfortunately, the king says it's everybody but people of the Jewish faith. Okay? At least at first, unfortunately. So that will change very quickly on. Because of this, and that was the king's doing, because of this, Pennsylvania will become a melting pot. It's the first American melting pot. And you could make a good living. How did you make a living in Pennsylvania and New York outside of New York City? Grain farming. These are grain farmers. Middle class. There's very few poor and very few rich in the middle colonies. And because it's a melting pot, you have to be accepting of other cultures and ideas, more than in other places. Because there were so many around you.
Wait, what's melting pot, Timor?
A melting pot, by definition, is an area that is multi-ethnic, millions of different ethnicities. The United States has always prided itself of being a melting pot, welcoming to all different backgrounds. But really, it's the middle colonies that first do this. Why? Because New England is busy being Puritan, except for Rhode Island. Why? Because it's mainly English, and later on slaves. We got to get to Bacon's Rebellion, but later on slaves that are in the South. The middle colonies will welcome everybody. Okay? You will likely get an LEQ choice that will have some sort of comparison to New England, the middle, and the southern colonies. So I named the southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. The New England colonies, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and I'll write that on the board here once I find a marker. And the middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. And really, it's New York and Pennsylvania are the most important. New Jersey will act like New York. Some say it still does. Delaware will act like Pennsylvania.
But the Chesapeake is just considered Maryland and Virginia.
Correct. And that is a vocab. I'm glad Tim pointed that out. That is a vocab term that we need to be comfortable with. Chesapeake is Maryland and Virginia. Think tobacco. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. All of which are Puritan, except for Rhode Island. Okay? Questions on chapter 3. Let's go over the vocab real quick. What do I think you'll see? Let's see here. Metacom's War. There's going to be something there about the Native Americans. No doubt in my mind. Mayflower Compact. Almost yearly. Majority rules. John Winthrop. For sure. Okay. Squanto and Massasoit. Mainly knowing that that's the tribe that was at the first Thanksgiving. An example of peace. William Penn, and I should highlight Quakers, even though it's back up earlier, sorry. And then grain farming in the Middle Colonies. All right. Yes,
Why did Roger Williams get kicked out?
excellent question. He told the General Court of Massachusetts Bay that church and state should be separated. What? What? You mean? I mean, you can just imagine these Puritans who are, their head is, shaking and on a swivel or something. OMG, and just, blowing up. You banished out. By the way, he could have stayed in Massachusetts Bay, but what would have happened to him?
He'd
He'd been killed. Yeah. All right, chapter 4. Do I have a volunteer to read chapter 4? Thank you, Tim. Oh, go for it. Yeah, if you ask a
I think
question.
you said Metacom was at the Thanksgiving dinner.
Massasoit was Metacom's father.
Oh.
Massasoit at the Thanksgiving. Metacom rallies the troops in Metacom's war. Tim, are you willing? Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
So I have for New England, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut.
Yep.
I'm missing, how many southern states are there?
It's called colonies, and that's a good point. I'm glad Matthew brought that up. We are colonies until the Declaration of Independence. We're basically colonies all night long. So 5 southern colonies: North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, and Georgia. Southern colonies. Okay? All right. Any volunteer to read chapter 4? Don't all volunteer at once. I'm getting overwhelmed. Thank you, sir. Go for it. Yeah, and it's a long one, so I appreciate that. Yep.
Life was hard in the 17th century Southern Colonies. Disease drastically shortened lifespans in the Chesapeake region, even for the young single men who made up the majority of settlers. Families were few and fragile, with men greatly outnumbering women, who were much in demand and seldom remained single for long. The tobacco economy first thrived on the labor of white indentured servants, who hoped to work their way up to become landowners and perhaps even become wealthy. But by the late 17th century, this hope was increasingly frustrated, and the discontents of the poor whites exploded in Bacon's Rebellion. With white labor increasingly troublesome, slaves, earlier a small fraction of the workforce, began to be imported from West Africa by the tens of thousands in the 1680s, and soon became essential to the colonial economy. Slaves in the Deep South died rapidly of disease and overwork, but those in the Chesapeake tobacco region survived longer. Their numbers eventually increased by natural reproduction, and they developed a distinctive African-American way of life that combined African elements with features developed in the New World. By contrast with the South, New England's clean water and cool air contributed to a healthy way of life, which added 10 years to the average English lifespan. The New England way of life centered on strong families and tightly knit towns and churches, which were relatively democratic and equal by 17th century standards. In the late 17th century, however, social and religious tensions developed in these narrow communities, as the Salem with Hysteria dramatically illustrates. Rocky soil forced many New Englanders to turn to fishing and merchant shipping for their livelihoods. Their difficult lives and stern religion made New Englanders tough, idealistic, purposeful, and resourceful. In later years, they spread these same values across much of American society. 17th century American society was still almost entirely simple and agrarian. Would-be aristocrats who tried to recreate the social hierarchies of Europe were generally frustrated.
Thank you very much, Tim. I almost timed it right. Okay. First of all, life expectancy in the Chesapeake, Maryland and Virginia, high or low? 39. Women in the Chesapeake, many of them or very few of them?
Few.
Why would a woman want to come to a swamp? Doesn't sound that attractive. We need to discuss Bacon's Rebellion here. I wrote down Bacon's Rebellion, decline in indentured servants, and a rise in slavery. Why? What happens here? Go for it, Aiden.
Because Nathaniel Bacon was like mad that the governor wouldn't protect the frontier, so he led like an uprising of indentured servants and farmers and stuff, and because the indentured servants were like trying to destroy the capital, people didn't trust him anymore.
One of only 2 times in American history that the Capitol was burned. True or false? Bacon's Rebellion will include the burning of Jamestown. True. True or false? Nathaniel Bacon will die of dysentery about a month later.
True.
Great example of the very low, great example of the very low life expectancy of the Chesapeake. Nathaniel Bacon was only 29. Okay, but after this, rich planters do not trust indentured servants anymore. So indentured servants are on the decline. Well, rich planters, they need to look for something, so they're going to decline indentured servants, and they're going to increase buying what? African slaves, right? Okay? Slavery is an economic system. There was slavery in New England as well. But before we get there, after every slave revolt, first of all, are slave revolts ever successful? Like, do they ever get freed? Unless you're talking about Haiti, but in the United States, no way, right? Therefore, after every slave revolt, what happens to those slave codes? They do what?
Increase.
They tighten, right? Chesapeake is making their money on tobacco plantations. The comparison here now is to New England. I'll get the purple marker. That's the chapter. Chesapeake v. New England. So the comparison here is to the New England colonies. And in New England, the life expectancy is high. Women, there are many of them. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. I wrote down rocky soil. Why is New England's rocky soil such a powerful part of our course? You could even argue it caused the Civil War. Go for it, Daniel. And I appreciate the others.
Slavery dwindles because there's no use for them.
Slavery is an economic system. You can't grow tobacco or sugar or rice or indigo or cotton or any of that en masse in New England. Okay? So they turn to farming, small farms. Additionally, Puritan families are large. Since these farms are small, with large families, who works the farms?
The kids.
The kids.
The kids, right? So small farming, fishing, and shipbuilding, which means there is no economic need for slaves en masse. Yes, there was slavery. Tituba was a slave, right, of Salem witch trials fame. But slaves were often house slaves that were simply hired by wealthy families. Meanwhile, the number one job in colonial America, I don't care which region, the number one job in the early United States all the way until the Gilded Age, most people in America did what to make their money? They were what? Farmers. Agriculture. This means there'll be very few poor in colonial America. Okay? Very good. The other thing I need to add here for New England, okay? And I'll bracket this off because this is all parts. All 13 colonies under farming. Okay. I need to add in a town hall, or more importantly, a town green. New England towns were planned, and in the middle there was a town green. Why do we care? What was the reason for the town green? The men of the town did what every day? What am I thinking of, Casey? train, drill militarily. Why? Because they were always under threat of attack. Not from the British, not from anybody like that. Who was the threat of attack at that time
Natives.
from Native Americans. So every town in New England is planned. There are no towns in the Chesapeake because you are simply taking land for your tobacco plantations. Okay? All right. Let's do one more chapter, chapter 5. It's a very short summary, and then we'll take our break because we're a little overdue for that. But let's do one more chapter. I will give you time to take pictures of the break. We'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll have 3 chapters left. We're on pace. We're totally fine there. But I do want to get through chapter 5 because it goes very well with chapter 4. Claire.
What should we highlight for chapter?
Thank you so much. What do we highlight for chapter 4? Very good. Bacon's Rebellion, no question. New England Town Hall / Town Green, no question. Rocky Soil, absolutely. Middle Passage, maybe, but triangle trade is more important, and that comes in the next chapter, so we can leave that. Indentured servants / African slaves, knowing that they decline in indentured servants. By the way, students sometimes get this confused. Where did indentured servants come from? They were of what descent?
English.
They were English, okay? So just keep that in mind. They're English, they're Europeans, okay? After Bacon's Rebellion, that declines and increases with African slaves. Stenell Rebellion, if you see it, it's the most successful slave revolt in colonial America. It lasts 2 days and it's not successful. What happens to slave codes after the Stenell Rebellion? They're going to tighten. Chesapeake we talked about. I'm not worried about the socioeconomic pyramid of the Chesapeake colonies. So, Bacon's Rebellion, New England Town Hall, Town Green, Rocky Soil, indentured servants v. African slaves, Chesapeake. Okay? All right, any volunteers to read 5? To read 5. 5 goes with 4. It used to be 1 chapter in previous editions. Any volunteers to read 5? Don't all volunteer at once.
I can read another one.
Go for it, Aiden. I appreciate that.
By 1775, the 13 American colonies east of the Appalachians were inhabited by a burgeoning population of 2 million whites and 500,000 blacks. The white population was increasingly a melting pot of diverse ethnic groups, including Germans and the Scots-Irish. Compared with Europe, America was a land of equality and opportunity for whites, but relative to the 17th century colonies, there was a rising economic hierarchy and increasing social complexity. 90% of Americans remained agriculturalists, but a growing class of wealthy planters and merchants appeared at the top of the social pyramid, in contrast with slaves and jailbirds from England who formed a visible lower class. By the early 18th century, the established New England Congregational Church was losing religious fervor. The Great Awakening, sparked by fiery preachers such as Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, spread a new style of emotional worship that revived religious zeal. Colonial education and culture were generally undistinguished, although science and journalism displayed some vigor. Politics was everywhere an important activity, as representative colonial assemblies battled on equal terms with politically appointed governors from England.
Okay, so this is colonial American culture. First of all, by 1775, the population is rising. It's 10 times larger than it was in 1700. Why? One word. Why did people come to colonial America? Why would you come? Opportunity. Who said that? Casey Daly from the Corner for 3, and it's good swish. There was opportunity. Because what was the ticket to the middle class? You had land. Even today, if you own land, that's your ticket to the middle class. And you could get that. Was there a whole lot of poor people in colonial America? No. Because what was available? You could get what? Land. So people thought if you were poor, you were lazy. Also, it becomes a melting pot. The population by 1775 is under 50% of English descent. It's about 20% African slaves by this point. This is mainly in the South, but all the 13 colonies had slavery. And then 2 minority populations, the Scotch-Irish and the Germans. The Scotch-Irish settling in the hills of Appalachia, they become the hillbillies. Now, culture. First of all, this chapter can be summed up in 2 words. The first of them, mercantilism. Haven't talked about mercantilism since early October. Mercantilism means that what is the point of a colony? The colony should do what for the mother country?
Money.
Make as much money as possible.
Make as much money as possible. Did the 13 American colonies do a good job of making money for England?
Yes.
They did a great job of making money for England. Because of this, so mercantilism is the colonies should make as much money as possible for the mother country. Because they made so much money, how did England treat the colonies? They gave them what?
Salutary neglect.
Thank God we know that. That is fantastic. Salutary neglect. It was leave them alone. By the way, and this marker is retired. By the way, the complexity point is laissez-faire in the Gilded Age, right? Salutary neglect. Keep making us money and we'll be okay. And this becomes the expectation. You might remember the Molasses Act, where England said, you colonies will only import molasses, which is liquid sugar, to make rum, from British West Indies, Barbados, Jamaica, Bahamas. Do the colonies follow the Molasses Act?
Nope.
No. How many are prosecuted under the Molasses Act and put in jail?
Nobody.
Nobody. Because they're making money for England, right? The other thing that we need to talk a little bit about is the triangle trade. And there's lots of examples. Oh, I just used the class of 2025's favorite writing term, LOL. Lots of. But we'll just do one, okay? In that, here's colonial America. So here's the colonies. Colonies would send rum to Africa. Africa would send slaves to the West Indies. So here's Africa. You might remember doing this map in October. Here's the West Indies, which are the Caribbean. And the West Indies will send molasses back to the colonies to make more rum. Everybody's happy. By the way, I use that example because where's England on that example? It's not there. So again, and I know it's really hard to read, and I'll give you time to take pictures if you want to. 13 colonies, rum to Africa, slaves to the West Indies, molasses to the 13 colonies. Now there are areas / examples where the England is in the triangle trade. There's hundreds of different triangle trade examples that you could use, but I choose that one to prove the power of salutary neglect. Okay? Other thing I want to mention here, John Peter Zenger.
Oh, what?
Anybody remember him? He's an editor from New York. And he says bad things about the British government. And the thinking is, he goes to court, and the thinking is they're going to throw him in jail. But he ends up being innocent, which establishes the tradition of what in colonial America?
Free speech.
Freedom of the press, but yeah, free speech. So John Peter Zenger is an example of national identity. He's a newspaper editor who has proven, no, we can criticize the government.
Oh, Timo, how do you spell his last name?
Do I have it on here? I do. Z as in zebra, E-N-G-E-R. So very quickly. Oh, I should add one thing to colonial America. 3 letters. F-G-A. That is not Florida-Georgia Alliance, as a student once wrote. Has nothing to do with that. Okay? They're like, Timor, FGA's Florida-Georgia Alliance. No. First Great Awakening. Go back to church or
Go to hell.
you're going to hell. Did it work?
Yes.
Yes, people went back to church. And it's the first, how many out of the 13 colonies participated in the First Great Awakening?
All of them.
All of them. The first uniquely American experience. They shared this. Okay? Real quick, let's highlight the key terms. Okay? What will you see? Population growth. The idea, and because of opportunity. Okay? First Great Awakening. Sometimes you get an Edwards. George Whitefield is more common. Both of those, the most common preachers of the First Great Awakening. George Whitefield is the first American rock star. John Peter Zenger is rare, but if he's there, he's national identity. He's building freedom of the press. Triangle trade, often you'll see a map of it, just know what it is. I really should have added here mercantilism and salutary neglect, because that's more important to me than any of that. And I copied these from the American pageant, so obviously it wasn't there. But I would add to chapter 5, mercantilism and salutary neglect, because that really is the chapter. Colonies are making money for England, therefore they're treated with salutary neglect. All have colonial legislatures and the like. Okay, let's take a breath, group. I want to give you until, let's see, it's about 6:44. Let's say until about 6:55. We got 3 more chapters. 2 of them are quite short, 6 and 8. 7 is a biggie. We'll finish right on time at 7:30. If you want to take pictures, you can. If you need a breath, take a breath. We'll resume at 7:55. Good work, guys. 6:55. Good work.
Have
a USB port?
What?
Does your computer have a USB port? It doesn't.
It does not. I had to go buy an adapter at Walmart.
Dang it. I was going to ask you if I could. My phone's dying and I'm taking notes on my phone, so I was going to ask you if I can go to my car, grab my charger, and plug it into your laptop and set it in front of you.
What kind of charger?
Wait, actually, it's USB-C.
It's USB-C right there.
Wait, that's so baller.
It would like connect to my computer.
But can you just like tell it to not?
I think so.
Can we try it?
Yeah, why not?
And then you add mercantilism and salutary neglect. That's got to be that. Please do. Yep, 100%. All right, Jack. Leave the sugar. Maryland, MD. How come you not know that? I know I can.
It's Maryland. Yeah, it's an MD and.
Great work, guys. Good participation. You know your stuff. I'm impressed so far. Yeah, MD for Maryland, BA for Virginia. If you can't read something on the board, I'll talk you through it. It's a good time for that. That was such a good one. John newspaper editor.
No, you should cut that off.
Great work, guys. I'm impressed with where we're at. This is really good. We know our stuff.
Yes, I will share that with you. Thank you.
Timor, everyone. Timor.
She kept saying she was going to be here.
This is what we do.
Is this recording?
What?
Is this still recording?
Yeah. I mean, I could cut it out if I want to.
I'm sure if you can put it I feel like it's an obligation.
Okay. Fair. Good talk. Enjoyed it.
I was thinking, every time someone got up, I thought they were just going to straight up leave. Especially when it lasts. I wish I brought highlighters because my notes are like all over the place. There's pencil scribbles everywhere.
Timor, I'm getting some nice footage of this
I think I'm gonna
gummy eating.
I've been embarrassing myself before decades, so you know what?
I'm just following you around since
Hired
I don't
somebody
want
up
to
on
sit
the
for
TikTok with me doing the Charleston. I don't know what. And I'm like, I don't even want to see it. It's like, Timor, you. No, I'm good. Really.
If it blows up enough, you gotta get the ad revenue.
Well, you know, it's funny because I've never met Ivan in person, but he started making world videos because he thought they would help his students. And now, I mean, I don't know how much money he makes, but he makes more off his YouTube stuff by far than teaching. He does still teach. But what I'm told, he teaches only part-time because it's such a big conglomeration. Like, for example, and I told one class this, his ultimate review guide is outstanding, but it is almost, in it, there's a letter, it literally says letter to teacher, and it's basically a threat, in that if you use this with your class, then it's unauthorized, or it comes on you, well, it is. If I could, I would give you his practice test because it's wonderful. But I'm not going to break the laws, and I don't want Steve showing up at more like Northern one day and being like, so we need to talk. Yeah, he wouldn't be there for my autograph, right?
I actually am kind of. I just read all my review guides. They're like 20 pages. I read one every day.
6:55, we come back, group. That gives us 35 minutes to do 3 chapters, 2 of which are short, and one's pretty big. I will give you the practice activity to take home with you.
Hey, is this yours?
Yeah.
Is this?
Because we're not going to get there. Oddly, out of time.
Can I take one right
Try
now?
it.
Yes. Would you like it right now?
Trying to get in the footage, Tim.
It's in the back, so I know because I saw it. It's back here somewhere, Tim. It's near that door.
I wanted to do that for you.
We find it? Yes?
You really don't want it.
Is it not there? Here,
Yeah.
do me a favor. Take it from the box and across the way. I'll give it.
Let's go up in my bike.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I have to be terrible. I just got dizzy.
Aiden, I'm sorry, bro.
Bro, what?
This is my granola bar.
Like, it doesn't sound like it comes out.
It's really good. I know, it's out. My dad's a big fan of it.
Starting at 5:15 and ending at 10:05.
What?
That would be nuts.
Oh, these? That'd be crazy.
The longest one that we ever did, because Chandler was the man when it came to like discussion and going on tangents and such. And then at 10 after 10, it's crazy.
No way.
No.
I'm not downloading the software update to connect with Daddy Truman.
Start again in 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
But it's charging.
It is charging. Now you
Can I
just.
sit up here, Timur? Is that alright?
Yeah, totally.
I'm typing notes on my phone because I didn't bring it.
I also have Truman. I have this too. I didn't. It's a Mac charger. You can.
Oh,
plug
I don't
it.
have the what's. I don't. It should.
No, it's USB-C.
Would you rather me do that?
I don't care if
It
you
doesn't
want.
reach anywhere else. I'd have to like.
Just don't pull my laptop off the
not pulling it
fucking
off.
table.
I'll like scooch back. You'll be good.
Truman, what if you just like turn around? You just ate the camera halfway through.
I walk like past him, I like walk back.
Is this picking up audio? Like, are you 100%?
I'm pretty sure it is.
But like, what if it's not?
No, I've used it before. Like I've used this app before.
Can I say hi to it? Hello, any viewers. My name's Truman Columbus. That's what I introduced you.
Oh, check this out. You can make a move.
Ah.
Oh shit, hold on. I fucked it up. Hold on, wait. I don't know what I did. I just completely ruined it.
My extra stuff.
My laptop's not dead yet, so like, I think we're good. Dude, that would suck if it just did not record audio. That would be like very, very, very annoying. I think it does though.
Yeah, I really need that. And it's feeling really like.
Just like $5 a day. 3-minute warning group, start in 3 minutes. 3-minute warning.
Bro, I'm a note-taking machine.
Yeah.
Look at all these notes.
Bro.
I'm the note guy.
Oh, check out my notes, bro.
Mine are,
Wait, hold on. It starts here.
mine are literally a leaf. And tell me you can read any.
I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages.
Yeah, I got.
Truman, I could have taken notes on my laptop if I wanted to, but I decided not to because.
You're a little bitch.
No, because
Pardon my French camera.
you weren't even on it. You didn't even get on the camera.
It doesn't know who I am. It's okay. But it can hear me now.
Yeah, at least it should. I think it just picks the audio up from my laptop. Dude,
Bro, this is definitely gonna be so like.
okay, if it doesn't,
Correct.
that camera's microphone is so bad.
Yeah, I know. I've heard it. It's like. We'd be like on Discord.
If it doesn't do well, I'll have to buy another USB
You can use my
adapter.
C902. You can use my C902.
No, I have a microphone. I hope it's recording from a friggin' this
We can
mic.
use OBS. We can bring in my blue.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do next time.
We'll bring in my blue snowball because it picks up everything within a 20-mile radius.
Hold on, wait. Wait, what happened?
Where's Charlotte located?
Okay, it's using Truman. It's using the MacBook mic. We're good. I don't think it's using the. It says it's using this one.
Hello, MacBook Mike. Hello.
Wait, this is like the game room that you used to have, right? Like that little...
I don't know.
Well, it looks...
1 minute. Start
If it goes.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Whoa.
Wait a minute. Now, I have, so full disclosure, right? In my wallet, I carry with me from a Chinese meal of about 4 months ago, Lucky is coming your way. Now, you want to talk the fortune cookie. Now, why am I telling you this? Because you want to talk about Lucky. Grace Lee just gave me a quarter. Now, first of all, not only is this, anytime you give an East Sider money, we are very happy. More importantly, it's a Jamestown quarter. It says Virginia 1788, which is when Virginia became a state, and it has Jamestown, the first ships arriving at Jamestown. No, it doesn't say Jamestown was a swamp and most of them were going to die. But anyway, regardless, and you want to talk about lucky, Virginia became a state on June 25th, 1788. June 25th is my birthday. So there you go.
Whoa.
So I've just all fits together. It is. That actually is true.
What is, wait.
That's the lucky fortune cookie was talking about.
That's definitely the look.
I don't know, man. I think you got something else up your sleeve.
Yeah, it could easily
I think you're gonna like win.
I think Timor is Virginia.
Well, I will say,
Like he's actually
you know how
Virginia.
teachers, when they retire, they wait till the end of the year and they have these parties and whatnot. Whenever I go, it will be on like a Tuesday in February. It'll just be, well, that's enough for me. Thank you. Good day. I'll tell my class. Like, I'll tell them, you know, the week before. But I don't know any of that party or, like, sometimes.
No way you're gonna do it earlier. I don't buy it.
Sometimes they roast people. They're like, you remember that time? I want none of that part of it.
You're too committed to APUSH.
That's the problem.
You couldn't abandon your students.
It'd be too hard for me. 30 seconds, group. We'll start again in 30. There we go. 25. 20. 15. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. For time's sake, for these last 3 chapters, I am going to fairly rudely call on people. If you are voluntold to read, please be the good people that you are and read accordingly. We move to chapter 6. The chapter summary is in the middle, as it always is. Emily Massett, would you be so kind as to indulge us in chapter 6, which is the French and Indian War chapter? Please and thank you. And again, I know it's rude. I never like to be voluntold to do anything, but for time's sake, it makes sure that we end on time. So thank you for Emily and the other 2, who I will simply make volunteers. Please and thank you.
Like Britain, France, entered into the American colonial struggle, eventually developing an extensive, though freely settled empire, economic
Stop, highlight that. When you think New France, you think fur trade. If you see anything about New France, it's a one-trick pony economically. New France, fur trade. Emily, continue, even though I've now been rude to you twice in the last 90 seconds.
During much of the 17th and 18th centuries, Britain, France, and Asia and British cargo left frequently erupted into world wars. In North America, these wars constituted an extended military duel for imperial control. The culminating phase of the struggle was inaugurated by young George Washington's venture into the closely contested Ohio country. After early reversals in the 7 Years' War or French Navy War, the British under William Pitt revived their fortunes and won a decisive victory at Quebec, finally forcing the French from North America. The American colonials who had played a large part in Britain's imperial wars of France emerged with increased confidence in their own abilities. The removal of the French and Spanish threat to British control of North America kindled increasing tensions between the colonies and Britain. The Ottawa chief Pontiac's unsuccessful uprising in 1763 convinced the British of the need to continue stationing troops in America. But with foreign threats gone, the colonists were unwilling to pay taxes for British protection and increasingly resented Britain's authority over them.
Okay, when we get to wars, and the French and Indian War is the first one, and Heimler does a solid job of this at each one that we look at. It's causes and consequences. So here we are, this chapter is about the French and Indian War. And a couple other things that we'll talk about in a minute, but let's talk about the French and Indian War. That's the nickname it's given in North America. It's the 7 Years' War in the rest of the world, and oddly it lasts 9 years. It's 7 years on the European continent. That's why it's called the 7 Years' War. More on that when we get to AP World next year with either Mr. Weber or Mr. Drummond. It's caused by one thing. Both New France and the 13 American colonies of England want a certain section of land. What am I thinking?
The Ohio River Valley.
The Ohio River Valley. So that is the cause. It is a singular cause. New France has it. The 13 colonies, more specifically Britain, wants it. So the cause is control of the Ohio River Valley. Okay, now, consequences. Well, first of all, who fought on what side? This is the French and the Huron Native Americans. We'll talk about their relationship in a minute. Versus the English, the Iroquois Native Americans, and I'll get out of your way in a minute, and the American colonists, because the American colonists are proud British citizens. They have no desire to not be British. Why? It's the lowest amount of poor people in the world at the time. Things are good. They have the protection of the best army and navy in the world. Now, let's talk about how the French treat the natives, okay? Many of you, when we got to this point, said the French treated the natives better than the other two. Now we're at a point in our time where we need more specific historical evidence. True or false? The French will intermarry with the Native Americans.
True.
True. True or false? There is an economic relationship with the French and the Native Americans in North America. True. The natives help the French with the fur trade. It's really that simple. In return, the French will attempt to convert them to Catholicism. They will intermarry with them, and they sort of leave them alone. Okay? So, yes, you weren't wrong back in October when you wrote that the French treated them better, but that's not an AP answer. The specifics, they will intermarry, and there's an economic relationship. Okay? Now, a couple things about the war itself, and you're not going to focus, I'm sorry, the book says the Battle of Quebec and the like. You're not going to see that. More importantly, there is a big winner and a big loser in the French and Indian War. Who wins the French and Indian War?
The British.
The British. This group here, and it is a big win. So they win. What do they get? They get the coveted Ohio River Valley. So now, the land in the 13 American colonies goes all the way to the Mississippi River. what about the French? They are the big losers here, because what happens to their land in North America?
Do they lose outside of a few islands?
Well done. Their land in North America, with the exception of fishing islands in the St. Lawrence, modern-day Quebec, and Haiti, is gone. So again, and I set this up tonight so that we can revisit it at every war we get to. Heimler, it's his genius, because he's the one that first looked at APUSH and said, all students need to know about every war is causes and consequences. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. So the cause is control of the Ohio River Valley. The English want it. The French have it. At the end of the French and Indian War, the English gained the Ohio River Valley, and now the 13 colonies go all the way to New England. Or excuse me, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. France abandons their land in North America, I should be clear, except some fishing islands in the St. Lawrence and Haiti. In modern Quebec, and Haiti. Now, a couple other things about the French and Indian War, a before and an after. Put that up there. Before, I'm going to write 3 words up here. Those of you who are MLS fans, Philadelphia United uses this as their slogan. Their slogan. Join or die. That should trigger something. 1754. It's the first American political cartoon. Who drew that first American political cartoon? It's a serpent.
Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin. It's pointed. He is trying to get colonists to come to the Albany Congress. Okay, he wants all 13 colonies to come there. He draws a serpent, but the serpent is in pieces. What's he saying with that serpent? Well, what good is a serpent if it's in pieces? Is that strong at all? It's dead. But if the serpent is united together, is that serpent strong then? That's what he's saying. Anybody remember how many colonies will actually attend the Albany Congress? 7. Good. So, and I appreciate the hands. Only 7. But it's a small step toward unification. Now we need to talk about the after. Even more importantly, England throws colonial America a curveball. Just when colonial America's proud, this is when George Washington first has his battles. He's a British general, right? Everybody's happy until, dun-dun-dun, the hammer drops. And it was called the Proclamation of 1763. It was, you can't do something. You can't, you being the American colonists could not do exactly what? Go for it, Matthew.
Settle west of the Appalachians.
Settle west of the Appalachians. Here's the plot twist. Did the average American colonist want to settle west of the Appalachians?
No.
No. But did they want the right to settle west of the Appalachians?
Yes.
More importantly, it changes the relationship. Going all the way back here to a little over an hour ago in your past, when we mentioned the House of Burgesses. House of Burgesses is established by 1619 in Jamestown. Now, it's 1763. What are you talking about? Almost 150 years later, you're going to now put regulations on us? You're going to now violate is the first violation of what?
Salutary neglect.
Salutary neglect. Highlight it, star it, use it for any prompt about the American Revolution. This changes the relationship, right? And the relationship over the next few years will change, but we get to that in chapter 7. That's chapter 6. French and Indian War. Causes, Ohio Valley. Consequences, France is basically eliminated from North America. Yes, sir, Chase.
Is this before, what is that before?
Okay, good. And so, thank you so much. I should put here, this is, and I should clarify, this part is before the French and Indian War, because it's 1754. This is after the French and Indian War. So there's one key thing from this chapter to know that happened before the war, one key thing to know that happened after the war. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Griffin. I appreciate it. What else here? Let's look at the key terms and see. Okay? New France, what type of government? What type of government did New France have?
Monarchy?
Monarchy, autocratic. It's run by a king. King Louis. I am the state. French and Indian War, obvious, I would highlight that. Proclamation of 1763, obvious, I would highlight that. Albany Congress of 1754, that's the join or die. 7 colonies only will attend the Albany Congress, only 7. If you see Treaty of Paris of 1763, it's not usually worded like that, but if it is, that's the one that ends the French and Indian War. Causes and consequences. And that, I don't take credit for that particular way of organizing wars, that's all Heimler. But if you can think of wars in the terms of causes and consequences, it's how you get 5. It really is. Okay? That's one of Heimler's tricks that works well. Okay. When you're ready, group, flip the page, please, to chapter 7, if you would. Chapter 7 is all these violations of salutary neglect. Aiden, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't catch what government was New France.
Oh, it was autocratic,
Okay.
monarchy. Sabrina. Okay, real quick. I had a question about Pontiac's Rebellion. After the French and Indian War, and you might want to use this as an example of Native Americans, Chief Pontiac in this area will have a quick little mini revolt, and that quick little mini revolt is against the British. It lasts 4 months. The British will put that down. But when they put down Pontiac's Rebellion, they say we must protect our colonies. Pontiac's Rebellion will lead to the proclamation of 1763. Britain thought that they were doing the colonies a favor. Were they really doing the colonies a favor? Not really, because it changed the relationship, and it changed it forever. It was a point of no return. Okay? All right. For time's sake, chapter summary. Let's go to Ahmed. Would you be so kind? I know being voluntold is rude, but if you would, please, chapter summary starting with the American War of Independence.
The American War of Independence was a military conflict fought from 1775 to 1783. But the American Revolution was a deeper transformation of thought and loyalty that began when the first settlers arrived in America and finally left the colonies' political separation from Britain. One source of long-term conflict was the tension between the considerable freedom and self-government the colonies enjoyed in the American wilderness and the participation in the British Empire's mercantile system. While British mercantilism actually provided economic benefits to the colonies, along with certain liabilities, its limits on freedom and patronizing goal of keeping America in a state of perpetual economic adolescence stirred growing resentment. The short-term movement toward the War of Independence began with British attempts to impose higher taxes and tighter imperial controls after the French and Indian War. To the British, these were reasonable measures, under which the colonists would simply bear a fair share of the cost of the empire. To the colonists, however, the measures constituted a tax on fundamental rights. Through well-orchestrated agitation and boycott, the colonists forced repeal of the Stamp Act of 1765, as well as the Townshend Acts that replaced it, except for the symbolic tax on tea, a temporary law on conflict between 1770 and 1773, ended with the Boston Tea Party, conducted by a network of Boston agitators reacting to the Massachusetts governor's attempt to enforce the law. In response to the Tea Party, the British imposed harsh, intolerable acts, constantly passing the Quebec Act at the same time. These twin actions aroused ferocious American resistance throughout the colonies and led directly to the calling of the First Continental Congress and the fight of arms that Lexington conquered. As the two sides prepared for war, the British enjoyed advantages of a larger population, a professionally trained militia, and a much greater economic strength. The greatest American asset was the deep commitment of those patriots who were ready to sacrifice for them.
I appreciate that's a long one, and yet I'm going to sum it up very easily for you, I think. What I'm writing on the board, and I'll go through it in a minute, is all of the violations of salutary neglect and the reactions. And that is this chapter. Oops. So, and you can take a picture of this later, because this chapter is actually very easily summed up. I don't expect you to remember every single one of these. If you do, great. But really, this chapter is about the following. The American Revolution was not fought to gain any new rights, not one. Why was the American Revolution fought?
Get back salutary neglect.
To get salutary neglect back. To get back the rights that they thought they already would have. So, starting with Proclamation of 1763, these next three acts were designed to pay for the French and Indian War. Right? Okay? And the reason was, the thinking was, is that, hey, the colonists are proud British citizens, they should pay their fair share. Well, didn't quite work that way in the eyes of the colonists. So it starts with the enforcement of the navigation laws. They hadn't been enforced for 150 years. The colonists think this comes out of left field. Then there's a tax on sugar. Then there's a tax on stamps. How did tax collectors get treated, by the way?
Horribly.
Terribly. It was dangerous. Stamp Act gets repealed. The Declaratory Act gets passed. To me, this one is the most important because it says only Parliament can govern the colonies. It makes colonial legislatures useless. And the colonists are like, what's going on? The Townshend Act gets passed. The only one that sticks is the Tea Act of 1767. To enforce it, more troops get sent to colonial America, leading to the Boston Massacre. You might remember Paul Revere's engraving. Anybody remember how many people actually died in the Boston Massacre? 5. Does that engraving make it look like a lot more than 5 people died? Yes. Absolutely, on purpose. This leads to, look what I did there, causation. The Committees on Correspondence, these were the letter writing campaigns by the Sons of Liberty. Meanwhile, Parliament will pass the Tea Act of 1773 that says you will import tea only from the British East India Tea Company. And the colonists say, don't tell me who to get my damn tea from. It would be like me saying that you can only get your coffee from Starbucks, not anywhere else. Big B, or what's the new one called? That's by Kroger there? Streeters, like that, right? Okay. What is it called? Scooters. You know, what is it? Streamers? Okay, not streamers. We'll go with scooters. You can tell I drink a lot of coffee. Oh well. Leading to the intolerable acts. This one to me is another biggie because it closes the port of Boston and suspends the Massachusetts legislature. Virginia will stand for this and say, we stand with Massachusetts, so the House of Burgesses gets suspended as well. You did a journal on that, give me liberty or give me death. First Continental Congress said, hey, we're going to write a letter to the king and tell him we just want our salutary neglect back. What did the king do with that letter? Ignored it completely, right? Then you get Lexington and Concord. The Second Continental Congress is then, hey, king, we're going to actually write the Olive Branch Petition. Olive Branch is peace. We're going to try one more time. Why am I doing this? I'm setting the table for you because when the Declaration of Independence is passed in the next chapter, it is done by saying, therefore you left us no choice. Meanwhile, please, if you haven't already, write down, the American Revolution is not fought to gain any new rights. Not one new right. It's fought to protect the rights the colonists felt they always had. It's fought to get their salutary neglect back. If you understand that, not only do you understand the American Revolution, but you understand the Articles of Confederation. Because let's be honest with ourselves. Did the Articles of Confederation give salutary neglect back? It did. That was the whole point. It said little government, because that's what we wanted. Okay? All right, I'll give you a minute to catch up on that. We got plenty of time. We'll do chapter 8. And again, we'll be right at 7:30, as I always am. I said 1 through 8. We're going to do 1 through 8. Yes, sir.
Would it help on the AP test, like if we have a prompt about the like of the American Revolution? Would it help to know the name of the professor, like from Harvard, who said the American Revolution was only fought to
Awesome.
keep
If
race?
you get a prompt on the American Revolution, and you can drop in Bernard Bailyn or Dr. Bailyn's thesis, it's almost guaranteed for that. Some of you are like, who in the world is that? And to remind you, the Harvard thesis, Bernard Bailyn's thesis, he's the one that comes up with the idea that the American Revolution was not fought to gain any new rights, it was fought to get your salutary neglect back. If you put that was the Harvard thesis, if you want the name of the professor, he actually just died a couple years ago. His name was Dr. Bernard Bailyn, B-A-I-L-Y-N. If you can drop that in, that's 5-level stuff. Not required, but if you can drop that in, that's the kind of stuff that impresses AP readers. Okay? The last one says Second Continental Congress and Olive Branch Petition. I'm sorry, it goes First Continental Congress, Lexington and Concord, Second Continental Congress, which was Olive Branch Petition. Okay? All right, group. Need a minute? Are we ready for our last chapter of the evening? But, by the way, could you imagine these being 5 hours long? I lived it. It was 5 hours. It was unreal. It was I actually told the group at one point, I'm like, there's a TV show I wanted to watch at 9 o'clock, and now I'm missing it. So, anyway.
You should do one that's 5 hours.
A marathon.
Wait, Timur, what are
One that's 5 hours and so you can sit through it.
As a challenge?
Yeah.
All right, group, chapter 8. Let's see.
what about the vocab, bro?
Oh, yeah.
The vocab.
Oh, vocab, thank you, sorry. Vocab. Okay, ready? First of all, with mercantilism and salutary neglect, please draw an arrow up to chapter 5. I get these from the American Pageant. Those fit better with chapter 5 than chapter 7 because the salutary neglect in chapter 7 gets violated, so we've covered that. Navigation Acts, know that they get enforced here. You do see Patriots, Whigs versus Loyalist Tories. Whigs were the name of the political party in England that supported the Patriots. Tories were the name of the political party in England that supported the Loyalists, those who remained with England. Sugar Act, first tax. It's a tax on sugar. Okay? Stamp Act, yes. Please add to that the Declaratory Act. That one's even more important. Stamp Act gets repealed. Declaratory Act takes away the power of colonial legislatures. If you see no taxation without representation, the name you're going to see is James Otis. He was a Massachusetts person in the Massachusetts legislature. If you see a document like on a DBQ where it says Otis, he's the no taxation without representation guy. Boston Massacre, not so much. Boston Tea Party and Intolerable Acts, yes. Okay. First Continental Congress, just know that the colonists tried to reconcile and it didn't work. Lexington and Concord, please know that's the first battles, if you see them, of the American Revolution is at Lexington and Concord. Don't need to worry about who wins or anything. It's most important that when the Declaration of Independence is written, the fighting had already started. And then I put his name on there for that reason. If you see Bernard Bailyn's thesis, he was the Harvard professor that rearranged how American history is taught. He blew the doors off the idea of the American Revolution. It's really fought to give salutary neglect back to the colonists. They wanted their salutary neglect back. Okay? All right. Let's see. Chapter 8. Pretty short summary. Maya indulgence. Again, I'm sorry to voluntold people because I hate being voluntold to do things. But for time's sake, if you would.
After Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress did not at first pursue independence. The Congress's most important action was selecting George Washington as military commander. After further armed clashes, George III formally proclaimed the colonies in rebellion, and Thomas Paine's common sense finally persuaded Americans to fight for independence as well as liberty. Paine and other leaders promoted the revolution as an opportunity for self-government by the people, though more conservative Republicans wanted to retain a political hierarchy without monarchy. Jefferson's Declaration of Independence deemed
deepens the meaning of the struggle by proclaiming its foundation in self-evident and universal human rights. The committed patriots, only a minority of the American population, had to fight both loyalist Americans and the British. Loyalists were strongest among conservatives, city dwellers, and Anglicans, except in Virginia, while patriots were strongest in New England and among Presbyterians and Congressionalists. In the first phase of the war, Washington stalemated the British, who botched their plan to quash the rebellion quickly at Saratoga. When the French and others then aided the Americans, the Revolutionary War became a world war. American fortunes fell badly in 1780 to 1781, but the colonial army in the South held on until Cornwallis stumbled into the French-American trap at Yorktown. Lord North's ministry collapsed in Britain, and American negotiators achieved an extremely generous settlement from the Whigs.
Okay, this chapter is actually pretty easy. There's 4 parts. First of all, let's start with common sense. Who wrote Common Sense?
Thomas Paine.
Thomas Paine. Here's why it's important. Here's why either Thomas Paine or Common Sense or both will show up as a prompt on the AP test. It does almost every year. It changes the opinion of the majority of colonists. I'll say that again. Common Sense will sway the opinion of the majority of colonists to revolution. It will convince them, you're right. A republic is the best form of government. The king is being tyrannical. And a larger geographic area should not be controlled by a smaller one. It sways public opinion, not everybody, but enough toward independence. If you want the numbers during the American Revolution, about 40% wanted independence, about 30% wanted to stay loyal to Britain, about 30% didn't care, they just wanted the war to end. They wanted basically economically, the economy in the American colonies goes down during the American Revolution. So this 30% group just wanted the economy to go back. This comes out in January 1776. On July 4th, 1776, you get the Declaration of Independence. It is 3 parts. It has an introduction. What kind of ideas does Thomas Jefferson put in the introduction?
Enlightenment.
Ideas from the Enlightenment. That government should protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are Enlightenment ideas. By this point, colonial America had been through the Enlightenment, they were enlightened by it, and they thought government should protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that England was no longer doing that. Then there is the body. The body has 28. It's a listing of 28 violations of what?
Salutary neglect.
Salutary neglect. That the king forced us to quarter soldiers. The king suspended our legislatures. The king taxed us without representation. There are 28 total. And then the conclusion, Jefferson says, therefore we have no choice. And he uses the word but to secede, but to break away from the empire. The American Revolution, the war itself. So part 1, common sense. Part 2, the Declaration of Independence. Part 3, the war itself. There's only one battle that they're going to ever ask you about, and that's Saratoga. Why do we care? Control. We're almost done, gentlemen. Thank you. Because it's an American victory, but it convinces what country to help the Americans? France. It's the first treaty. Saratoga leads directly to a treaty with France. So Saratoga is 1777. The U.S. does not win the war without French help. They must have French help to win. Sometimes you're asked about the last battle. It's the Battle of Yorktown with the trap. The big winner is the USA. We formed the United States and it goes all the way to the Mississippi River. That is due to shrewd negotiation on the part of John Jay, because John Jay does not negotiate with the French. Why? The French see this as an opportunity to take back the Ohio Valley. But does the United States want the Ohio Valley?
Yeah.
They do. So John Jay turns to England and says, you know what? If you negotiate with us and you trade with us again, then we will give you all the way to the Mississippi River. So America goes from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. We end there because we can now call Americans Americans and no longer colonists. If you would like the activity that I didn't design it, but it's a really good one, that we were going to do if we had about 20 minutes left, but I'm not going to keep you for it. However, it is an interesting activity. It's a cool little review exercise, and it doesn't take very long. You simply ask yourself, what would be the 6 most important events from the time of Columbus to the Declaration of Independence? I'll put this on the back tables on your way out. Questions, Claire? The terms, key terms. So, real quick. Key terms, chapter 8. Settle, I don't want to yell over people, okay? Common sense, absolutely. Declaration of Independence, absolutely. Battle of Saratoga, with what I put in parentheses, convinces the French to enter the war. Treaty with France, that's the first treaty we signed. We do not win the American Revolution without French help. Okay? Battle of Yorktown occasionally. If you see the Treaty of Paris of 1783, that ends the American Revolution. More importantly, we turn our back on France. I would add why. It's not over. There was a reason. We turn our back on France because France wanted to pin the United States to the Appalachian Mountains. They wanted the Ohio Valley back. We say no. So we tell England, we'll negotiate with you as long as you give us up to the Mississippi River. And England hates France so much they say okay. Whigs and Tories, remember, Whigs were pro-Americans in Britain. Tories were pro-loyalists and anti-Americans. Great job, group. Really one of the best first reviews that we've done. I'll leave these up for pictures. I'll put my activity on the back table if you'd like to take it.